Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar brought to you by Dovetail Learning. And what we're going to do is have a conversation between myself and Jeanna Ruppel, who you'll meet in a moment, about strengthening restorative practices using resilience skills, and a particular model of resilience that comes from Dovetail called We Are Resilient. Uh, Before we jump into it, I'll just let you know that I am Chuck Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of Dovetail Learning. I'm a transpersonal psychologist by training and developed my career through school counseling for 25 years and have been in the nonprofit world for 10 of those years, particularly related to bringing resilience skills to schools. And Jeanna, welcome. So happy you could join us today. You're our resident expert in restorative practices. Would you just like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm really thrilled for the invitation to be here with you today, Chuck. I went through the We Are Resilient coaching courses with Dovetail Learning through the pandemic. And so I am a district restorative specialist. We have a team of us at Santa Rosa City Schools. And I'm just really excited to be here and have this conversation and explore together.
Well, thanks for being here, Jeanna. It's a pleasure. Let me just say a couple of things about Dovetail for people who don't know. Dovetail is a nonprofit. We've been in existence since 2008. Our mission is strengthening resilience. So we teach SEL for adults, and we also bring that to children. But the program that we're going to be discussing is really an adult-centered program, and with a vision of making the world a better place. It's very simple. The other thing you should know about Dovetail is that all of our resources are open education resources, which means they're free for all. They're licensed through Creative Commons, which is an international license, allows you to download all of our work for free, adapt it, give attribution to Dovetail, collaborate. We love to learn what you're learning through the process. And then the license subscribes that anything you publish related to it needs to also be published as an open education resource, free for everyone else. Um, Today, what we're going to be doing is talking about strengthening restorative practices, and we'll just look briefly at what resilience and what it is. Um, Talk a little bit about breakdowns and how they lead to breakthroughs, which is really the essence of restorative work, don't you think, Jeanna?
Yeah, definitely. The breakdown in relationships, the breakdown inside of our own relationship with ourselves. So yes, very much.
Um, yeah, it's I like to call it the human condition. When I have a breakdown, it leads to the breakthroughs. And so then what we're going to discuss is different aspects of restorative justice and the We Are Our approach, which is shorthand for We Are Resilient. So just want to also say before we jump into the work itself that this webinar is being recorded. I will send out the recording to everyone who's on it and also send out the slide deck. So you'll receive all of the slides, and we'll talk about a few other resources at the very end. This is billed to be a 45-minute webinar, so we'll do our best to keep it at that. And so glad you're all here from all over the United States. Uh, so resilience, what is it? Gosh, what is resilience to you, Jeanna?
It's a big question, especially in these times. You know, we all have physical health, we all have mental health, we all have spiritual health, we all have just our well-being in every way. And resilience to me is how to continue showing up every day in a healthy space, and also knowing how to not show up when I need to take a break for myself or I need to do other things. So we'll get a little bit more about that around our restorative practices and what that might look like.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the way you said that. Give a couple of definitions here. One is just the simplest, the ability to adapt and respond to meet challenges, which is what you're talking about. I adapt, I adjust, I change what I need to do every single day, hour to hour, minute to minute. It's the going off balance and coming back on balance over and over again. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower, and we say that it can be strengthened. Resilience can be strengthened through resilient practices. So another definition we love to use is this one from Ann Maston at the University of Minnesota. She wrote this article on ordinary magic, and resilience really is, it's essentially a part of all of us. It's a superpower we all have. It's not rare and special. We all use it every day, and it's a matter of digging into it and pulling out and anchoring to the skills and practices that we can use in our work. So just a little bit further about the dovetail approach. Again, called We Are Resilient, it's made up of two sets of patterns. It's an illumination of how cultural patterns live inside of all of us, those things that are passed down intergenerationally. And it's also illuminates what we call protective patterns, which is our reactive resilience, or what we might call our reactive patterns, and how those both help us whenever they come up, but they can also get in the way as kind of cultural patterns. And then the other side, yeah, go ahead.
Pause for a moment. We have a request in the chat to transcripts, please. And
oh, you know what? We don't usually do transcripts. We have the recording though, so the best we can do is give you a recording. We're not set up to turn the recording into a transcript, but thanks for the question. So moving forward from inside the We Are Resilient approach, we've got the two sets of patterns and then three sets of skills. Centering skills to bring ourselves into balance, ground ourselves. Set of skills called connecting skills, which are about relational resilience between me and another person, and collaborating skills, which are a distinct set of skills that groups need and use. And we say that the cultural patterns are how we view the world, reactive patterns are how we react to the world, and the skills are how we create our world and how we pull ourselves forward. Anything you want to say about that, Jeanna, before we move forward?
Well, the reason I love We Are Resilient, I have my coaching in several different venues, including HeartMath and restorative practices, restorative work. But the reason I love the We Are Resilient is because of how it breaks it down. Like, it speaks to me around our restorative continuum. And so really, I just want to pause on that slide just for a moment so that we can kind of look at that and integrate that into our dialogue going forward.
Thanks, Jeanna. And what I want to say is we're not going to explore all of these patterns and skills by any means. This just gives you an overview of the full approach, and then we're going to pull out a few key ones that we'll talk today and their particular relevance to restorative work. Okay, so restorative practices. We're going to just take a little bit of time to connect the dots between restorative practices and what we're doing, and the challenges and the healing that's possible through restorative practices, healing from harm, conflict, betrayal, and emotions. And for me, as a psychologist and a somatic-oriented psychologist, the emotional world is really what we're talking about across all of this, how we're impacted at the gut level, the heart level, the body level, and of course the mind plays a big part in that, but it's how we touch into our deeper self. So I just want to dialogue with you a little bit on that, Jeanna, before we go to the restorative model. What's healing? What's the healing? How does resilience relate to healing?
So, in these times and where we're at, the healing aspect of it all is to, for me personally, and what I can only speak from my perspective in where the healing lies and what it means to me as a restorative practitioner. I've been a practitioner in the juvenile justice system. That's where I kind of got started, and working with adults as well as the juvenile population. And I've been in the schools now for 10 years or better. And so the healing aspect of it to me so often is how do we humanize our systems, as well as how do we practice being human together in a world or in systems that aren't really designed for that.
Aren't supporting us in that. Yeah.
They definitely don't always support us, but they aren't designed for that, right? Like that is not the design of these systems that we choose to work in. Mm-hmm. And so I think as a restorative practitioner, it's kind of my heart's work and my mission to be a part and be a change agent, and not just healing myself through this work, but and healing others or holding a space for others to find their own healing. Is also to do something with our systems. So
Yeah. So a meta perspective on that might be that resilience is what we pull out of people, what we invite people to in order to overcome harm, conflict, betrayal, and the difficult emotions. It's that core of resilience, that ordinary superpower that we're calling on in people. And what we're going to look at is some of the particular ways in which we can do that through the
and also, sorry about that, Chuck, but also to be aware of the capacity of each individual in the resiliency process, and that this isn't just a linear thing, that it's very much cyclical, and we have to honor where everybody is at in their process along the way. And so that, like you said, resiliency, we can build on resiliency, but it's just like empathy. It's a muscle we have to build, we have to work at, we have to align ourselves to, and how we show up every day.
Well, let's look at the restorative questions, and let me ask you, how do these questions pull resilience out of people? How are they related to resilience?
Yeah, so we chose to start with these questions. Oftentimes people think of restorative and they think it's all about repairing harm. And that is a lot of what we do, but there's a continuum. And so when you look at these questions for me, and this is from our district and it's used universally, it's an invitation through these questions for people to, we start up in our heads, like, what happened? What did you do? What's going on? What's the story? And then dropping a little lower into our heart center so that we can tap in and somewhat feel into what's going on really in this situation with what happened. And then going deeper down as the questions kind of take us down into not just how others are affected, but how are you truly affected with because we're so trained to like think about others, but what about you? Like, where are you affected in this whole thing? And then the last question is the healing aspect of what can we do to make it as right as possible.
The other thing that I have experienced myself in this kind of restorative work is it starts with our personal resilience. How did I get off my resilience? How did I lose my balance? Then it moves into the relational resilience between me and another person. And then it does move into the group or community resilience, and how does that ripple out into the impact on a classroom or a school or a household and their community. So those three aspects of personal, relational, and group are all embedded in these questions. Well, let's move forward and just look at resilience through the lens of our stress response. This is what happens to all of us when we lose our cool. We're going along fine. We have a stress event. There's a reaction. We call those protective patterns. Our emotional reactivity peaks at some point, and then we eventually calm down, and there's often a depletion after that. So what we understand in this is what's happening when something goes into the area of harm. It happens both for the person who's doing the harm and the person who's being harmed. And we like to say we learn from each other. So the power of modeling, and how modeling is also a part of the restorative process, which is a resilience piece. And I'll just lay this out and then ask you to comment, Jeanna. We know that in modeling theory, there's a dysfunctional model. Someone's doing something wrong, they're off balance, there's a victim or there's a perpetrator, and life is difficult. On the other end of the modeling spectrum, we have the perfect model, like everyone's perfect and controlled, and it's often inauthentic and fragile, like I have it all together. And in modeling theory, we know that the coping model, the person who shows up and says how it made them feel and can be vulnerable and transparent and authentic and strong. This is the learning model. So we call this a resilience approach. Your thoughts, Jeanna?
Yeah, if you think about restorative in schools, and we're often caught between the life is hard and and everything's perfect, but we're really in the learning model. How do we cope? How do we help our youth figure out how to cope? How do we help our peers and our colleagues? And that's, to me, what resilience is all about. And it is a triangle, but instead of it being a trauma triangle, it's more of a cyclical type, instead of getting
Learning,
back to that.
learning triangle.
Yeah.
What I know about groups is that when a restorative circle is happening, whether it's in a small office or whether it's the whole classroom or a much larger group, uh, everyone's learning from each other, and they're learning from those coping models. When people break down and they become in an attacking mode, they're not learning from that. They're learning from the modeling of authenticity and vulnerability and the sharing of feelings. So we had one more slide we wanted to put up related to modeling, and this comes from Gabor Mate, who's worldwide, world renowned really for his work in trauma. And I was just watching one of his training sessions, and he distinguished this difference between attachment and authenticity, and it's very much a part of a restorative process because we all need attachment. And we have a primary need, which is this drive for closeness and proximity, to being connected, and people are driven by that. But we also have an equally primary need for authenticity, to be connected to ourselves and to stand up and say what's true for us. And sometimes what happens when there are breakdowns is that people lose their authenticity and they go with doing something harmful. Any comments on that, Jeanna?
No, I think the balance of, I think what you really said is right on about the that attachment or that belonging that we as humans need, that is so intrinsic as to who we are. And so oftentimes, and as we know, everybody needs that one safe person in their life to help their capacity to be able to cope and to be in that coping learning place.
Right, and that one safe person can be the restorative practitioner who's making relationships, developing safety and strength before a restorative circle occurs or a practice or a meeting. So all of that development, which is again pulling on the relational component of our resilience, because strong relationships strengthen us. That's a resilience factor. The other side of that coin is what we call shame. Shame, here by Brene Brown, she says, it's an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And she goes on to say it's an emotion that affects all of us and profoundly shapes how we interact. in the world. So a perpetrator will experience shame for having perpetrated. A victim will experience shame for having been harmed. Um, and the reason we brought this up is because it's integral to the protective patterns that Dovetail has uses in their model. Protective patterns again being our reactive resilience, and they include these 6 pieces: distrusting, hypervigilance, hyper caretaking, avoiding, defending, and attacking. And these are some of the things that show up inside restorative circles. Don't you think, Jeanna?
Absolutely. And as even a practitioner, right? Like even as a practitioner, I have to know myself. I have to know my protective patterns. I have to know my strengths. And if I know, oh no, that's starting to show up, then I need to take a step back and look at myself so that I can be a better practitioner as well. So I know we talked earlier, this is primarily focused to adults, and that's where we're at, I think, today. So it's like really taking a good look at ourselves. And our protective patterns, as we've talked about before, are there to protect us. They don't just show up randomly to ruin the room or to destroy a relationship. They're what our brain and our bodies are totally programmed to do. It's that inside of us that has gotten us to where we are right now in our time and in the space.
Yeah, we all learn these things in our early development. Let's go through these 6 just very briefly. If we look at distrusting, doubting ourselves or others, I learned how to distrust right off the bat when I was young. I grew up in an alcoholic family, very rageful father, and I had to doubt myself and I had to doubt him. I also had to be hypervigilant, which is translated later in life into being a perfectionist, watching everything, making sure I've got it right, being on constant high alert. The hyper caretaking and avoiding kind of go together. One is getting too close, the other is getting too far away, maybe. In hyper caretaking, do I over prioritize others at my expense? Well, I don't know about you, Jeanna, but that's been a big one for me in learning how to have healthy boundaries and to take care of myself. And and avoiding, equally, do I withdraw or retreat, which was also a big part of my own experience. And then the last 2 we call defending and attacking. Do I act like others are constantly judging and criticizing me? I was just doing some writing about this in the We Are Resilient approach about cultural patterns, where we learn to judge ourselves, where we learn to judge others, the intergenerational transmission of judgment and criticism, and looking down on people who are others other than us or different than us, which can be often a precursor to causing harm. And then lastly, the attacking behavior of going after someone else when we think that they've harmed us. Um, Curious, Jeanna, how these sets of skills inform you in in the midst of a restorative interaction using restorative practices.
Well, as you notice under each skill, it says to be curious about what's showing up in the space. So as a practitioner, not only am I tracking my own resilience within the space that I'm holding or providing for the dialogue or the restorative conversation, I also have to track what's, as a skilled facilitator, what's going on in the room and how are those protective patterns showing up for other people. And so oftentimes in our practice, we want to build a relationship with every participant in that restorative dialogue or that restorative relationship, or it doesn't work, right? So I spend time with them and get to know them. I get to know their protective patterns, and we have an agreement prior to even going into some of those hard spaces. Like, I know attacking and defending is your thing. So if you're starting to feel that, or I'm thinking you might feel it, it's okay. We set up a time, but we set up like it's all right. If we need to take 5, we can take 5 and step away for a minute and come back. It's okay. And so just normalizing those protective patterns, normalizing them as it's not bad or good, it just is. And these are your strengths, not just what has been undermining you, but these are your strengths with who you are. So let's turn that story around in your own mind or in our group or wherever we're at, and turn them into something that can help us be more resilient.
Strikes me, Jeanna, that a big part of what you're saying is that tapping into resilience and inviting others to tap into their resilience is to normalize their human experience, to not make people wrong for what they've done, but to have it be an inquiry into sort of the repercussions of it and the roots of it, as well as the healing that then becomes possible.
Right, the healing and the learning, and I think normalizing that. I was in a workshop this morning with SCO, Sonoma County Office of Education, and the quote that took away from me, which I'm so happy when I hear our higher ups say things like this, is discipline doesn't work without relationships and connection. And I'm like, yes, thank you.
Right.
Oh yes, I wrote that. And being able to learn and relearn and having space where we can learn and relearn.
Yep, that's it, isn't it? Well, let's move on to the resilient mindsets and how these also impact your work in restorative practices. So these are mindsets, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that we say matter, and it includes 3 mindsets of curiosity, choice, and courage. We say that curiosity is about leaning into, a real inquiry into how am I being and what don't I know, and the curiosity about, well, what happened to me when I decided to create that harm, or what don't I know about the impact of that harm on others when I'm inside a restorative conversation. And then choice is what is an empowering choice that I can make? Really, what's possible? When we really open our minds to what's possible, forgiveness is possible, and reparations are possible, and actually having a relationship with someone who we've harmed is even possible. And then lastly, the mindset of courage, which is grounded in our heart. We say, what is my heart telling me? Because courage comes from the root word core, which means heart. So courage is about following our heart, taking a stand for what we know and believe and value, and resting on those. So, Jeanna, how do the resilient mindsets play in your work in restorative practices?
Well, if you're not aware of how to be curious or to an awareness of choice or courage, this isn't the right profession for you. This is something for me when I'm sharing with others, and I get to mentor people often, and really how I think it's just the foundational mindset that's necessary to even allow restorative to work or to even be a restorative practitioner. Um, and the courage, the heart piece, this is hard work, and it's hard work, right? And we can only stay in this work if we know how to be resilient and have that resilient mindset.
So it strikes me that you're talking about our adult experience as practitioners, and I think it operates equally within people we're working with, whether it's other adults or children, that help them, guide them, invite them to be curious about what happened and what's going on and how it impacted others, and of course the restorative questions all lead to that. and what are the possibilities, and what is my heart telling me. Um, so let's take this just a little further, and then we'll look at some skills. Um, the we apply the mindsets to the stress curves. So if we use curiosity, and when we're looking at stress, it's really the question of, well, what the heck happened here? What happened to me? What happened to others? It's using the inquiry of, what don't I know about this? What don't I know about what happened for this person that I harmed, or what don't I know about that person who harmed me, and what's in their background that caused them to get to be this way, which leads us to then the possible choices. Pausing, noticing, choosing, um, lets us then also choose um, what we call resilient practices. So if we're starting up that stress curve and we notice that we're getting caught in a protective pattern, we move into curiosity and choice, then we can ground ourselves in something, anchor ourselves in a way that causes us not to go through the roof. And we call that managing our stress curve. And that choice is the place that lives in between the stressor and the stress. Um, it's it's the open space, and we often create that open space in a restorative encounter, don't we, Jeanna? With
Yeah,
time and timing and leaving space, spaciousness.
yeah. The power of choice, and we used to call it, like you said, that's that superpower, right? Of resiliency is our superpower because it allows us to be in that place of choice. We can respond or we can react. And when I'm working with our youth or working with adults, so you're not just normalizing those protective patterns, but you're bringing in the strength of the power of choice, the power of pause, the power of being in your resiliency.
Mm, yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, empowering people really is what it's about, and empowering their resilience, their ability to bounce back, their ability to gather themselves and get centered and reach out across the circle and connect, and to repair and collaborate in that. So the third mindset is courage. We call it feeling and knowing and speaking what we know. Um, One of the original words coming from Latin is cuere, or curatism. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but it's about speaking one's mind by telling one's heart. So again, back to the heart, and the power of courage, and this mindset, which we say, what is my heart telling me? And often it's telling me, what kind of person do I want to be? It has to do with the values that we hold. And when we apply that to our stress curve and we show up with courage, then we don't have to go through the roof. We can take a stand and learn to take a stand and be whole and complete, even in the midst of the greatest difficulty.
And I think too, when we talk about the power of courage, so many people create guidelines to hold those safe and brave places. Um, you know, circles are not nowadays always real safe for people, or they don't feel like they're safe places. And so, the power to even show up in a circle, to even show up in our restorative process, takes that. And so being able as a practitioner to hold that container with some guidelines, with some agreements, and learning how to be a facilitator and being able to um, tap into my own courage to be able to do that. Like that's not always the easiest place to be. And so with the guidelines, like there's a framework and we set those frameworks up so that we all can show up and create those very safe and brave places for people. And it's a choice. Once again, it's an invitation.
Mm.
And that's something I think for restorative practices, oftentimes it's it looks like or feels like it's not a choice. And if that's the case, we're not doing it with fidelity or integrity or a place where it can be a learning environment and a safe place for students or adults to show up in their resiliency.
Right. And that takes us opening up our heart to them, whoever them is, that's being brought together, and trusting their ability to show up, as well as having the deepest compassion for who they are and why they are the way they are.
Yeah, and you brought back to values too. You said something earlier, Chuck, about values, and how important that is for us to understand and know our values and our universal values as being human as well.
Yep. Yep. Courage is so much about values, standing behind our values, both to stand up for what's right, but also to stop what's wrong, whether it's stopping the bully on the playground, or any other kind of harm that's occurring. So let's move forward into the centering skills. At the beginning of the webinar, we showed the full approach that Dovetail has put together, the 2 sets of patterns. We've talked about one set, which is the protective patterns. We won't be talking too much more about the cultural patterns. And then 3 sets of skills. And we're going to oh, actually, this slide is wrong. It should say centering skills. We're gonna focus on a couple of the centering skills, not the connecting skills. And the centering skills that we're gonna focus on are 2: noticing myself. We'll do a spotlight on that. What is that skill, and how does noticing myself, the skill of awareness, impact, and how can it be brought into restorative work? And then the idea of positive reframing. So we'll have just enough time to do those 2, and then we'll close out with giving you a few resources. So Jeanna, noticing myself, and we want to bring our mindsets to this, to be curious about, well, what the heck does noticing myself mean, and what are the choices that I have, and how can I be courageous about noticing myself?
Right. Right, and I think I spoke to that earlier as a practitioner. This is one that you have to super practice. You have to be aware of. You have to be aware of your physical. Like if you're noticing myself, we talk about the pause. I think we have these little taglines on all of our skills where pause, what's the cause? And that's a great question to ask yourself, like, why am all of a sudden I'm sweating and I'm clammy in my hands, and what's going on with me? Or, I have to understand that about myself, like what in this situation is making me be that way, and how can I help myself? Because I might have a job to do, or I might have whatever in front of me that I need to do, how to set myself up to be the best can be in that situation.
And how do you apply that noticing to this dimension of the restorative model?
Yeah, so I think I brought that up earlier. It's that noticing ourselves. As you look at the social discipline window, and we want to be in that with box. If we're in a restorative mindset, that is the place that we try to strive to be at, with a high accountability and high support way of being, not only with others or in our restorative processes or practices, but with ourselves as well. When I was pre-COVID, I felt like I was going into classrooms and doing circles to people because something had happened. And it didn't feel like I was doing the work with fidelity. COVID has allowed me to take a step back and to hone in on my own skill set, to do more of our restorative with model and approach, and also knowing for myself, when I'm stressed, which box do I automatically go to? And I need to be aware of that. I'm an authoritarian type person, so oftentimes I will jump into that 2 box, be defending, attacking, and knowing how that affects what's happening with those around me. But I also know that sometimes I need to step respectfully, not in a neglectfully kind of way, but I may, for my own self-care, need to take a step back into that not box, so that it's not a bad thing to be in the 2 or not or 4 box, But if I know intentionally and I'm noticing myself, and when I'm going from box to box, it's not a reaction, it's a response. It's something that I am choosing to do from my coping space of resilience.
Well, I love how you connected that to the protective patterns, and the positive dimension of the protective pattern. If I need time and space, to pull away so that I can get that for myself, or if the client needs some time and space to take that 5 minutes, pause and breather. Okay, we're not going to be in this conversation for 5 minutes. That's a very restorative, resilient approach to honoring what is.
And it's very empowering to whoever you're working with, because you're noticing them and they may not even be able to notice themselves, and you're seeing them.
Isn't that what we all want? To be
Yeah.
seen, heard, felt, known.
Right.
I mean, the most egregious thing is to not be listened to, or to be cast out of the village, or to be not paid attention to in your family, or in a group or a classroom.
Right.
So hard.
Right.
Us humans want to be connected. So let's just look briefly at these noticing myself. When we're curious about it, what am I noticing related to thoughts, the words, internal dialogue, um, emotions, the body feelings, the protective patterns, my state of being. Um, all of these are part of what we get to notice. And what I think I'd like to do, Jeanna, is go ahead and jump to reframing, so that we can stay on time here. And so switch to a spotlight on positive reframing, which is right here. So we're going to bring our curiosity, choice, and courage to what is positive reframing, and what does it have to do with restorative? What's the resilience component when you help someone reframe a situation, the breakdown into a breakthrough? Could you say something about that?
Absolutely. And again, what I love about our skills is that we have that little tagline: change the view for a new you. And so there again, we often use, if you're looking at something, everyone has a truth to what happened, and their truth needs to be validated and seen as being part of the situation. Everybody has a different perspective. And once there's a space allowed for everyone to come into the room and tell their truth with authenticity, then there is this automatic positive reframing in the group as well as within individuals, because they're able to see the whole picture, right? Like, so it changes their view. And so many times we would say that's where the magic really happens, through this positive reframing. You'll have somebody come in and think that, oh my God, this kid's a monster and blah, whatever, They get to sit down, they get to know this person, they get to hear their story. And all of a sudden there's like this change inside of them, the empathy and the compassion kicks in, and the view of the story is remade, and there's some healing, and hopefully, we can step forward with that skill
So
in a
you're
stronger way.
you're describing how it naturally unfolds, the positive reframe unfolds within the restorative conference. We're going from seeing the glass half empty to the glass half full, being curious about how we can see the situation from a different perspective, and we get to make all these shifts from the mistake to learning, obstacle to opportunity, negativity to misunderstanding.
What I do want to put out there to everyone who's joining us today is that you will be getting this slide deck and the resources. So, the breakdowns, and, I know I'm very much aware that we're moving at a pretty quick pace because a lot of fun things to cover. And so I just want to take a breath here for a minute. We only have a couple more minutes left with each other, and just give us a few minutes to transition into how we want to close this time together.
Well, yeah, just pausing to let it in what we've been talking about. Resilience is an essential component of restoration and healing and drawing the resilient nature among our charges to help them understand this holistic view. I'm going to put up a holistic view here um, of the We Are Resilient approach, which includes these different kinds of resilience that we talked about at the beginning. Our reactive resilience, we've talked about that. Our personal resilience, what it takes to stay grounded and anchored in ourself, how we can reach across to relations and groups, and how it all rises from our cultural vantage point. So if you haven't already, if anyone wants to toss a question into the Q&A or the chat while we look at some of these resources that are available for you, feel free to chat in anything you like, and we'll pause and do that. Just also want to give you an opportunity to know that you can go to www.dovetaillearning.org. All of our resources, as we said in the beginning, are open education resources. There's a particular book for educators on practical skills for resilience. We also have a book for families and for healthcare providers, which is work that we do at Dovetail. We're just coming out with a student workbook to help students go through this material. There's a ton of video learning and digital downloads on our website, including here's an example of two of the books, Practical Skills for Educators and the workbook for students. And Jeanna, I don't see any questions, so I just want to say thank you to you for showing up. Thank you to all of you who came onto this webinar today. Pleasure to have you join us. We appreciate what you do, how you do it, and it takes all of us to make the world a better place. Any closing thoughts, Jeanna?
Again, I appreciate the invitation to show up here with you today and talk about this. This is very near and dear to my heart. And Chuck and I, we've known each other a long time through the Sonoma County windings of all of our social emotional resiliency, restorative inter-beings. And I just, again, I'm feeling very appreciative in this moment to be here now with you. So thank you.
Me too. Thanks, Jeanna. And thanks, everybody.